I'll just wait a few minutes for see if there's going to be any extra people coming along. If somebody could put just a quick message in the chat so that I know that you can hear me and you can see me okay, that'd be great. Can everybody hear me all right? Haven't got a message from anyone just yet. All right, well, I'll kick off. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So what I'm going to be talking about today is the new update to the Victron Servo or Carano software, which they call Venus OS. And that is 3.7. And I'm also going to be talking about the new MultiPlus 20 kVA inverter that's come out as well. So Victron have put out two new firmware updates quite recently for the Servo and the Carano. There was one late last year, which was 3.6, and now we've got 3.7. And so I'll include a few of the features in 3.6 for people who may not have seen those before. But there's some pretty cool new features in 3.7 to have a look at. So just to go over a quick summary of what those are going to be. They've got a switch pane and some improvements to the switch pane, so you can do some remote control or digital control of various devices. They've got a new GX boat page for CAN open motor control integration. More details from the Lynx Smart BMS NG series, so more detailed monitoring of those via the Servo or the Carano. Node Red virtual switches. If you don't know what Node Red is, I'll explain that when we get to that part. Further Garmin integration and native support for Shelly relays, which are some cool little relays, which I'll show you. Safari is that's an Australian company actually, and they have a digital switching device which has now got Victron integrated support, and they've got some new sensors which are further integrated, and a few little UI improvements as well. So the switch pane is a new page on the GX menu, which allows you to turn all sorts of digital devices on and off. So it supports various digital switching devices. So just to take a step back, I suppose, if you don't know what a digital switching device is, a digital switching device is just basically where you might have like some lights, for instance, and you might, instead of having a physical switch inside a caravan or a motorhome, you want to be able to control them from the digital control panel. So it makes it the whole user experience really slick. And so it's a piece of hardware which will do that switching for you and then digitally talks back to the Carano and allows you to do the control from there. So there's been third-party versions of these for quite some time, but now there's a bunch of these devices which are natively supported by the Venus operating system. So that's the Garmin Empire Bus, not sure how you say it, the Safari one, Shelly, and the GX relays. And it says many more switching types, including 3-state switching for automation override, and there's a color picker for RGB LED lighting systems. I'll explain a little bit. There's a a Shelly example of that I'll go through. And then new Node Red virtual switches. So Node Red, if you're not familiar with Node Red, is a low-code programming environment, which is been integrated with Victron for maybe about 1.5 to 2 years, maybe a little bit longer. It's a third-party platform, but it's natively supported by the Venus OS. And it's basically a separate area of the operating system where you can go in and set up Boolean logic in a low-code environment to control various devices. There's a lot you can do with it, and I've done a webinar on it a few weeks ago, and I'll be doing some more in the future if you're interested in that. But it's a very good way of being able to add extra features and automations that you can't do through the main options which are available on the servo. And it has a huge amount of integration with all sorts of other devices and digital applications. But previously, this part of the operating system was completely separate from the front end that we normally deal with here. But this integration that is now available through the switch pane means that those flows that you set up in Node-RED can now be controlled from the main screen on the switch pane. So you can set up some complicated or simple set of flows in Node-RED, and then your end user can control them with a simple switch or dial on the switch pane. The integrated relays on the Servo GX can now also be controlled via the switch pane as well. So previously you had to go through all of the menus one by one until you eventually got to the relay section, and it was not really very user-friendly. Now they're available in the switch pane, which makes it much easier for everybody. Just check for any questions. The switch pane allows you to present this information. You can customize this information on the switch pane. So you can change the way it displays for the end user yourself. And so they have a basic bunch of formats that you can use that with. And you can use regular switches, you can have sliders, you can drop down menus. And depending on what piece of hardware you're actually controlling, then you might be able to manipulate voltage or current and have various different types of switching. You can also use it for heating and cooling devices, for temperature set points. So it's really very flexible. You can also, I've been talking about caravan and motorhomes, but for off-grid homes as well, just for general home automation, it could be a feature that you could offer for your customers if they were so inclined. There's also dimmable output values as well, and step size, unit, and minimum maximum configurable ranges within those switches. So you can edit all of this in the back end so that what is presented to the customer in the switch pane doesn't go outside of the range of what actually they're trying to control. The actual switches themselves, the digital switches, have a few options there. So you can have an auto type switch, which shows whether the system's on or off. You can have a manual override. So for an example, if Node-RED controls a pool pump on auto, but the user can still override that with an on or an off. There's the color picker. Tapping a colored rectangle opens a dialog for selecting a color or a preset. The GUI design uses color wheels based on the type of LED. And if we have a look on this next slide here, there's an example here of a piece of equipment you can use to do that. So this is called a Shelly relay. Shelly make a whole range of relays that can be controlled digitally. Lots of them are just basic AC relays that you can have as a virtual switch in a house just to turn a load on or off. This particular one is got 4 DC channels. They're 4 amps per channel with a total of a maximum power of 10 amps. And it also has the RGB light outputs on it as well. And so that will integrate natively with the color picker that you've got in the Venus operating system, so that you can control the color of an RGB lighting system via this relay. That Wi-Fi, that Shelly device, the way that connects to the system is over Wi-Fi. So it either can be just on the user's local Wi-Fi, as long as the servo or Ekrano is on that Wi-Fi as well, or it can connect directly to the Wi-Fi hotspot of the Ekrano if you have that switched on. It'd be interesting to know in the comments of the sorts of things that people might have found that their customers would want to control. Just put that in the comments and I can have a chat about that if there's anything people are interested in. There's some new additions. This isn't strictly Venus 3.7, but this is some interesting additions to Victron Connect. So Victron Connect has had an update recently. And so previously, when you had Victron Connect either on your computer or your phone, for a while now, you've been able to access remote systems, but there wasn't a lot of information. In order to do that, you have to actually log into your VRM account within Victron Connect. But now you can see a system overview page, and then a data page, and then you also can see each individual device here, and you can go through and change their settings as if you were there in person via Bluetooth, which is really, really great. Makes things a lot easier for some of that troubleshooting. But it's a much better experience for the customer as well. The other thing that they've integrated is that you can now access the remote console from within Victron Connect. So previously you could only do that via a browser on the VRM portal, but now you can do that within the Victron Connect app itself as well, which is something that people have asked for a very long time, and might mean in some scenarios you may not need to have a screen provided to the customer, because they can just use their phone in a way that sort of didn't really quite work before. They've also rolled out the ability to do batch programming. If you're a manufacturer, for instance, you might be making systems for caravans or boats, and you want to program, 10 MPPTs all at once with the same settings. Instead of having to go into each one and laboriously change all the settings, you can now go through and scan the QR code of each one and then apply the settings to all of them in one big batch, which makes things much quicker and easier. There's also a new feature within the new version of Victron Connect for Android Auto. So Android Auto is a EV operating system, and that now has an integration with Victron Connect to allow you to see data and status from connected Victron devices. The Lynx Smart BMS NG series, so that's a really new series of smart lithium batteries from Victron. That's the next generation series. That's the ones with the external BMS rather than the built-in BMS. They now have a much higher level of monitoring when connected to a Ekrano or a servo. You can see all the individual cell voltages. Previously, you could only see that by connecting to them via Bluetooth. So you've got detailed information about each specific battery connected, including the cell voltages and temperatures. Another feature which has been rolled out is backup for VV bus devices. So that's the settings which are on your MultiPlus or MultiPlus-II. You can now back up those settings within the Venus operating system. And then you can also restore those. So that feature's been around for the Victron Ekrano or servo firmware for a while. You were able to revert back to previous firmwares on the servo. So now you have the ability to revert to different settings files for MultiPlus inverters or MultiPlus-II inverters. And that's just, you go to the main device menu, into the MultiPlus, go to advanced and back up and restore. And that's where you can back up your settings or restore previous settings. So that might be if you have different settings for off-grid than you do when you have a generator or on shore power or site power. Perhaps you might have different settings for different countries if you're on a yacht. That just adds an extra layer of flexibility there. The Node Red integration now offers a powerful set of virtual switch types. So this came out actually in the previous version, but it's still a relatively new feature. So these create interactive controls via the switch pane that can be linked to any automation logic in a Node Red flow. And so that bridges the Node Red programming and the normal GX user interface. So there's a fair amount you can do with that. And if you're interested in Node Red, I recommend you attend the next webinar that I do on Node Red. I've done 2 of them so far, and it's a very interesting aspect to these, which is quite unique amongst any of the competitors of Victron. There's another feature, which is Modifications checks page. So the new Modifications checks page has been added under Settings General, and it offers a quick overview of the software status on the GX device. More importantly, it gives installers and distributors a clear indication of whether a system has been modified, which can be helpful when you're diagnosing or providing support. So, you know, there's 2 types of customers, I find. There's people who leave it up to you, and then there's people who like to fiddle with it. And sometimes the people who like to fiddle with it are very good, and sometimes they do things which stop things from working. And it's good to know if something's been changed, because you don't always have a good record of how it was left. If the startup configuration has been changed, for example, to load a custom battery driver, or if an SSH key has been added, then that will be shown at a glance. And the page also allows users to disable modifications and to reinstall the latest firmware or run online updates, all from that pane. That's mostly what I've got on the new version of the GX device firmware. If there's any questions on that, just let us know. And then the other thing to chat about is the new multi-48 20 kilowatt model. So this is the biggest inverter that Victron make. And so it's a MultiPlus-I, it's not a MultiPlus-II. And it's got a 100 amp pass-through, and it's 48 volt only, of course. And the thing that's really interesting about it is that there's going to be a microgrid integration with it. I don't think this has been released yet. It requires a special firmware. But in addition to being, you know, a nice large inverter, it's going to be able to be used in a microgrid setup. I wanted to have some slides on this to present to you today, but there isn't anything from Victron available yet, even though they, at All Energy last year, there was a big presentation on it. But the idea behind it is that they will be, if you set up a microgrid with several of these devices, there won't be a master grid forming system and then grid following systems. There'll just be multiple systems which will be able to communicate with each other, I believe, over the AC bus, and they will sort out amongst themselves how to ramp themselves up and down, which gives you a lot more flexibility for adding new systems, and a lot more redundancy if you don't have to rely on one system to be the grid forming inverter. So for those of you who aren't familiar with microgrids, normally the way it works is you have one system which creates, which is if you imagine just a normal off-grid system, it's creating an AC output, and then you have a bunch of other inverters which connect to that, but they would be connecting via their input rather than their output, and they're treating it like it's the electricity grid, and that's why you call it a microgrid. With this type of setup, it will be more of a collective rather than a centralized system, which I think is really pretty interesting. But the specs on that aren't out yet. But the inverter itself is out and can be used as a normal inverter. It can be used in parallel and three-phase operations. And it has all of the normal specs available that you would expect to see. The same sort of voltage range on as you get on the other MultiPlus-Is. It's a large inverter, it's not a MultiPlus-II, it's a MultiPlus-I. The maximum battery charge current is 240 amps. And it has the same V-bus communications as all the others. So otherwise it's reasonably pretty similar. The dimensions of it are 616 by 422 by 375. So you know, it's getting pretty big, and it weighs 80 kilos. And I don't believe that it is on the CC list yet. I imagine they'll be applying for that shortly, but as we all know, that can take some time, and I don't think there is any MultiPlus-I units on the list at the moment, but this being a new one, maybe they might have an easier time with that. Now the other thing is that there's new MultiPlus-II units, and again, these are not on the CC list as far as I know, and so with the rebate schemes, they're not going to be particularly attractive to many people, but for some they will be. There's a 4, there's a 4.5, and there's a 6.5. And the thing that's interesting about these is that their output rating is closer to their nameplate rating than it is on the other inverters. And their efficiency and their output power relative to their size is greater than the other MultiPlus-II. And I believe that's due to I think it's an aluminium transformer instead of a copper transformer. Don't quote me on that though. And so you can see the specs here. We've got the continuous output power. This is 3.4 at 25 degrees for the 4, and we've got 4 for the 4.5, and 6 for the 6.5. And the peak power for the 4 is 6 kilowatts for 2 seconds. For the 4.5, it's 7, and 11 for the 6.5. So it's still, it's a low frequency transformer inverter, so it's still got a fair amount of surge whack in it compared to a transformerless style inverter. And you see the dimensions here. So for the 4, it's 576 by 276 by 160. So that's really quite nice and compact. And it's only 22 kilos, and the 6 is 29 kilos. So yeah, that's about all there is for that. Haven't had any questions come through, but if you've got any, let us know now. These are all available if you're interested, and the microgrid functionality I think is very exciting. And we will hopefully have more news on that soon once the firmware is released. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming. And we'll see you next time.